What's up, friends? I started this Vulnerable You journey about, 14 weeks ago now, maybe a little bit before that. And the whole time I've been thinking about doing a audio and video version of this. For those of you who, like me, just can't stop ingesting content, even on the go, in the car, on a morning walk, at the gym, whatever it is. And so I just kind of wanted to make sure that I was getting this in multiple formats. And it took a few weeks to eventually break the seal on recording this. So I just released episode 14 of Vulnerable You on Friday, and I am now recording this video. I will go back and record some of the old episodes too, and I hope to make this part of the reoccurring habit of writing the newsletter and then recording a video about it. So if you're not subscribed and you are hearing this in another platform, you can check it out at mattj.com. Yeah, I just want to dive right in and talk about how I think I'll do these is talk about the main body of the newsletter is usually kind of a story or a topic that I'm thinking about for that week that has to do with some mix of mental health and infosec and personal growth and things like that. And I'll probably talk about the topic on this YouTube and podcast version of this, and then I'm not gonna like read it word for word or anything like that. Just talk about the topic, and then just kind of go through the news highlights that I've pulled out for the bottom and any thoughts I have about all that. So with all that being said, let's get started. The topic I talked about this week was rejection. And so, being that the name of the newsletter is Vulnerable You, and it's all about the mixing of security vulnerabilities and emotional vulnerabilities and being vulnerable, and like recording this video feels a little vulnerable for me right now. Not gonna lie. I've done a whole lot of conference talks over the years. I've done a whole lot of webinars and all sorts of you know podcasts, webcasts, things like that. But I've never actually sat and recorded one by myself, just me, the mic and the camera, and some lights and things like that. So this feels a little weird for me. But on that topic, and having talked at lots of conferences over the last 10, 15 years or so, I think the first Black Hat talk I gave, which was kind of my first big talk, was in 2011. So 12 years ago now. And part of that whole experience is putting yourself out there and submitting a CFP, right? And actually submitting the talk for the review boards of the conference to give it a look and decide if you're worthy, blessed by their high holy council, right? So Black Hat and DEF CON and the Vegas conferences tend to be some of the most stringent review boards and kind of the highest bar to clear, right? And so having given probably 4 or 5 Black Hat talks now, I think DEF CON twice, I know the excitement and the nerves that go into that, right? And this year was a little bit different. I'm at kind of a different stage in my career where I'm not necessarily doing a whole lot of hands-on security research day to day. So I don't have any like cool projects that I'm working on, or like you know my first talk was about hacking Chrome OS, and one of my other talks was about like building a browser botnet from ad networks. It's not kind of how I spend my days today, right? So I submitted a few talks this summer, and they all got rejected in Vegas. And so I kind of wanted to talk about rejection and okay, how do I sit with that, and what do I do from there, right? Like, okay, am I just going to kind of throw these talks out, these ideas out? And no, I think I'm probably going to see what I could have done better, learn from it a little bit. And, some of the things I just want to talk about, and I talked about in the newsletter, is kind of naming this, right? Like you put a name to some of the feelings that you're feeling on rejection, because I think a bunch of us probably just got a lot of these emails this week. So hopefully a few listeners are probably not, maybe not hopefully, but some of the listeners are probably going through the same thing. So some of the things that I can say that I felt this week, right? A lot of self-doubt, a whole lot of self-criticism, some insecurity, right? Maybe some shame and some embarrassment, right? I talked about on Twitter and LinkedIn that I submitted the CFPs. I was very excited that I submitted them. So now I had to go out and say, well, they didn't get accepted, right? So a little insecure, a little embarrassed, right? And I think these are all pretty normal feelings in this kind of thing, right? But instead of kind of sitting and letting those voices in my head just kind of say, yeah, this was no good, and hang up the hat, you've lost your touch, you know, hey, you don't do any cool security stuff anymore. You probably shouldn't be on stage at the biggest security conferences anymore. Instead of sitting with that, I'm going to kind of think about maybe some of the tracks that I submitted to. Maybe how can I get a little bit more hands-on with some of the topics that I was submitting that were maybe a little bit more heady and esoteric, and maybe get a little bit more research and data around them to have like a stronger CFP for a different conference. Or maybe I can do it on a venue like this where I record or have my co-presenters that I submitted with come and record with me, and we put it on a YouTube, or we do like a LinkedIn Live or something like that. I think it would be pretty interesting, right? This is really where people who can go on and do great things versus people who kind of get stuck in this rejection loop can set themselves apart, right? If you think back to the birth of the B-Sides conference itself, was born out of rejection, right? A bunch of people on Twitter had their talks rejected from Black Hat and DEF CON and said, hey, why don't we rent a house? I think it was before Airbnb, right? Why don't we find some vacation rental and a projector, and we all just give our rejected talks to ourselves? And it was called B-Sides. B-Sides is one of the biggest security conference companies and circuits around now, and it was born out of rejection. Instead of saying, okay, well, I wasn't good enough for this, saying, hey, I wasn't good in, not that I wasn't good enough, but maybe it wasn't right for that crowd, and I'm going to make my own crowd, and we're going to talk to each other, and we're going to like it and learn something from it, right? So with all the positive, what are we going to learn from this stuff out of the way? Rejection sucks. It feels like shit. I did not feel good getting those couple emails, right? Saying, hey, not this time, right? But what was kind of interesting was one of the talks, I submitted a few technical talks, but one of them was more about what I'm talking about on this newsletter, right? And embracing vulnerability, and like how we can rewire the way that our brain looks at these things, right? That make us kind of feel bad, not just rejection, but just like the neuroplasticity around changing our mindsets to kind of look at things and have healthier habits and positive thinking and a growth mindset out of this, right? Looking at obstacles and saying, yep, like that obstacle, that means I'm going the right way, right? These kinds of thought processes that can kind of help rewire us was one of the topics that actually got rejected from Vegas. So, I thought it would be good to kind of sit and talk about this today. One of the main places that I draw inspiration from for this newsletter, and when I was getting started with this whole idea that I had about melding of the security vulnerabilities and like the personal emotional vulnerabilities, is actually from a speaker and researcher named Brene Brown. And she calls herself a vulnerability researcher. And I saw that and I said, hey, me too. Completely different vulnerability though, right? And so I was hoping to go to Vegas this year and kind of start to share this idea and like redefine what vulnerability is, right? Redefine how the security community looks at this and says, hey, these are a bunch of our weaknesses that we need to identify and eliminate, right? And re-inspecting that and saying, hey, from a personal side, I think vulnerability could be a great strength, right? There's a few reasons here, right? Like when we share these things and we open up and we talk about this stuff publicly, some of the struggles that we're going through, or things like rejection, or some personal stuff, or loss, or grief. We're opening ourselves up to kind of not self, but just criticism from who we're opening up to, right? Um, and what happens is kind of a beautiful thing as a ripple effect of this is that the rest of the people that are reading about your vulnerability, there's going to be a certain percentage of them who have felt that same thing, right? And they're going to realize that they are not alone in this feeling, right? So, really, the ultimate goal of sharing this stuff publicly is so that we all become more resilient together, right? I think this fits nicely in the InfoSec community, right? We do a whole lot to become more resilient, both personally and like maybe at your company. That's what you're getting paid to do, right? And I think the journey of sharing and redefining vulnerability in a personal way to become more resilient together is really the strength and the goal here. And I wanted to kind of share that in Vegas and bring that to the InfoSec community. And I'm going to find some other ways that I can do that, this being one of them. In this week's newsletter, I linked back to episode 6 of Vulnerable You, where I talked about a book by Angela Duckworth titled Grit. And she's got a few concepts in that I really liked, and I applied to InfoSec in that one. You can go and read it where I go into more detail. But one of the ones that made sense to reference in the realm of rejection, and when we're talking about that, is she talks about developing a growth mindset. And this is the concept of rewiring your brain to look at setbacks as opportunities for growth rather than just like evidence of your own limitations, right? You can draw parallels for this growth mindset all across InfoSec, where, okay, you're dealing with a data breach, you're dealing with some sort of incident response that security control might have failed. And instead of looking at some of these things as failures, you can look at them as opportunities to grow. And this is just kind of natural, what to do at a day job type stuff. But I think applying it to just bettering yourself in general and your own personal growth is a really powerful tool to think about, right? Especially when you're facing something like rejection head on. All right, that's enough about rejection. I wanted to cover the news links that I read this week that caught my eye, that I put in every newsletter at the bottom, and just kind of want to hit on some of the highlights, right? So one of the first ones that I saw that I had never even thought about this was a stack ranking of programming languages based on their carbon footprint or energy emissions. I just never even thought about this. And so there's a research paper that I linked that gives a kind of environmentally friendly score to programming languages, right? I had heard of things like the blockchain, Bitcoin mining being terrible for the environment and using a whole lot of CPU power, which of course uses electricity and so on and so forth. But I never really thought about comparing programming languages to each other in this same regard, right? So if you're curious, the top 3 best in terms of the energy score on this research paper are C, number 1, just behind it, Rust, the new hotness, and third is C++. So everyone break off your 90s programming skills that are still super valuable and efficient and fast, or you can play with Rust. The worst 3, super interesting, pretty much by far, Perl is the worst. Unfortunately, the next 2, which are incredibly popular, are the next 2 worst, which is Python and then followed by Ruby. I don't think I've worked anywhere that isn't making heavy use of Python these days. So maybe we got to start rewriting our Python stuff in Rust. I don't know about all that. All right, another one. This was kind of an interesting, not a use case, but an interesting case study in the supply chain security world, where a friend of mine, Nate Warfield, and his team did a bunch of research where they found out that millions of motherboards coming out of a provider called Gigabyte were being sold with a firmware backdoor already installed in it. So yeah, this was preloaded with a firmware backdoor to let anyone connect to it. There is an update out, so if you're interested, you can read about that and record your go install your update. Next, I have a kind of a funny one that we've seen a whole lot of domain squatting or people not getting their certificates renewed results in some form of embarrassment of, hey, we lost our cert, or we lost our domain. This one's kind of hard to pull back. The state of Maryland has a URL on their license plate, and they didn't renew that URL. So now it redirects to a casino based in the Philippines. Don't think you're going to claw back all those license plates anytime soon. So hopefully they can claw back the domain. All right, next up in the world of cybercrime, the FBI is investigating and has made a few arrests of a group called the COM, and there's a subgroup called ACG. They've made 2 arrests out of this group so far. This group is associated with a whole lot of swatting, basically calling in fake emergencies and sending a SWAT team to somebody's house or business. It looks like they were doing it to schools. They also threatened to commit bombings of numerous universities. So real top tier folks here. And so, yeah, I linked a report by Joseph Cox out of Vice, who's one of my favorite journalists in the space. And he talks about the FBI's investigation of the COM, this group. Next up, I linked a report from one of the coolest vendors in InfoSec, thanks to Canary. And it seems like they're going to start doing this report fairly regularly. So this is their quarterly report of a whole bunch of curated info security research and different things that they tracked, kind of a signal to noise type thing, but it's a beautifully done report. And one of the cooler things that that I thought about it was that they are a vendor. They do have a splash page for this PDF. And so I kind of braced for impact of them asking for all of my personal details and my company's revenue. And you just click the link and they give you the PDF. So thanks for just putting stuff out there and being cool about it. Next, a quick link from Elastic for those of you running an Elk stack at your job or in your lab. They finally have in-memory kernel call stacks in Elastic. I know this is kind of a deep technical cut here, but I thought this was a cool feature. Really ups the game for visibility. If any of you do DFIR type stuff, you know that it's kind of hard without in-memory visibility. So that is now part of Elk. I know their Elastic is not first to market on this, but I'm glad, given its popularity, that they do have it now. Next up, I saw kind of an interesting series of tweets out of Chris Krebs, who was talking about an announcement from China about their new plane, the C919, that they came out and kind of cheered that they had this new national plane. And there's a really cool infographic of all of the different parts of the plane that were stolen via cyber espionage. So apparently there's a whole APT group named after the individuals who were stealing the information to make this plane. So it's a cool graphic to see the different espionage campaigns and which countries the different parts of the plane got stolen from. So super interesting. Next, I really liked this talk at NorthSec 2023. And so I linked the whole talk via YouTube video for those of you interested. And the reason I like this talk is I like how popular detection engineering is becoming, right? Red team stuff, blue team stuff. There's the age-old debate about which one's more entertaining at conference talks and things like that. But detection engineering is kind of becoming a hot topic, and I'm very glad about it because it's incredibly useful on the blue and purple side of things. So this talk is titled Infrastructure as Code, Automation and Testing, the Key to Unlocking the Power of Detection Engineering. Super cool talk. Talks about MITRE ATT&CK and how you can kind of feed some signals from MITRE ATT&CK into things like an LLM or your SIM, and how to pull out signals out of that and detect attacks. That's pretty much the news this week that I have linked. I linked a few other little memes and stuff, but not worth talking about on the video or audio portion of this. So yeah, I want to just thank you all for listening or watching wherever you're consuming this, and let me know any feedback of any other ways that you'd like to consume this content, or anything I could do differently in this format or my newsletter, or anything you want to see. And yeah, like I said, this is the first one, so appreciate you being here. And we'll iterate. We'll get better with time, and I'm gonna go back and record some of the other vulnerable use, so we kind of have a backlog of content, and hopefully do this from now on. So thanks very much.